Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Mr. Sensible. Grab yourself a seat and get comfy. Today's video is one I've been looking forward to. Mr. Anthony Riley, who is still going on about gas pressure, being next to a vacuum and so on. Pretty much straight after this video shown, as a premiere, I'm going to have a live stream after show. If you're watching this sometime in the future, hello, I'll put a link on the video description. Mr. Riley demonstrates the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Well, I'm going to tackle that, and I'm going to have three things to help me. I'm going to have this box over here. I'm going to have a friend of mine who has helped give me some information, my old mate Jimmy, and of course my wonderful patrons. With appreciation to my patrons, including new patrons Blair Sadovitz, Brian Rulke, Critical Analysis, David Cooley, Duranku, Jason Downing, John Stock, John Tomczyk, Justin Neal, Lucky Jack Aubrey, Mark Adrisioko, Mike Apple, Paul M. Rowe, Peter Lennox and Tom C. And my newest patrons, Bjorn Kamitz, Edwulf Sledgeverter, James Holman, Michael O'Quinn and Strongle. Thank you all so very much. So, Mr. Anthony Riley, Sleeping Warrior, you have asked these questions so many times, and yet you still say they haven't been answered when they have. Is this lack of understanding? Is this willfully ignoring? Or is it lying? Who knows? Well, let's find out. You go ahead. Roll VT!
This is where you were taught you lived when you went to school. This is where I thought I lived until I was about 36.
Was that when your mum and dad got fed up and kicked you out, Anthony?
I'm now 39, and I know that I do not live here.
Well, that's a bit harsh. They kicked you off the planet.
This is a simple question. A simple answer is required. For all you ballers that think and preach your religion like it's true.
Well, how simple do you want it, Tony, me old mucker? You've had the answer before on numerous occasions, but you don't seem to like it.
The ball we see has an atmosphere around the outside. However, the vacuum of space is a zero value.
Yes, and everyone knows exactly where you're going to go with this.
We are told that we've got 14.7 psi at sea level.
Well, it's not so much that we're told. With a cheap-ass gauge, you can test that yourself. It's 14.7.
And we're told that the vacuum of space is 10 to the minus 17 tall.
Well, granted, that's a little harder for either you or I to test ourselves, but we can see and test the air pressure dropping as we go higher.
We're told that we've got gas pressure that we breathe, and we can walk outside and we can observe that there is indeed gas pressure.
Our survey said...
Well, just a minute ago, you were saying we are told that there's this pressure of 14.7. Now you're admitting you can go outside and observe it. Anthony, there's a massive difference between gas pressure and atmospheric pressure, as you have been told on endless occasions. Now, I thought of a neat way to think of this. Imagine our atmosphere is a whole bunch of rubber balls. If you have a bucket and you fill it with those rubber balls, it's at the same pressure as everywhere else. Now, if you put a lid on that bucket and keep jamming in more balls, you're putting them under higher pressure. That's your equivalent of gas pressure. They're pressing against the sides of the container. If, however, you just got a load of balls, which you should have because you're always talking that, if you got a load of balls and just piled them up in a great big heap, that's the equivalent of atmospheric pressure. There's no container, you're not forcing them, you're just piling them. And the ones at the bottom will be under a greater pressure than the ones at the top, whether that's due to gravity, dropity, or downity, or whatever the hell you want to call it.
It exists in the vacuum of space. Let's have a quick comparison of how we can create almost a vacuum on Earth, but let's look at the container that's required to do it.
Here you go, Anthony. Oh, I thought you were talking about your head.
This is NASA's Research Center Plum Brook Station in Sandusky, Ohio.
Well, correct so far, me old China. Let's see how far you can get before you go wrong.
It's the world's largest vacuum chamber. It houses a massive 100-foot diameter and 122 feet tall structure and is capable of getting almost to the vacuum of space.
Here's an image of it from the outside. Hey, Tony, you're doing all right so far. Keep it up.
Red alert, red alert, red alert, red alert.
I want you to look at the level of fortification that this thing has.
Tony, you've just gone and let us all down, haven't you? The Dunning-Kruger Effect is strong in this one. Why don't you do a little bit of research before you post this stuff? It might help you out.
Look at the strength and the depth of the concrete and the supports and the surroundings of this environment to separate the Earth's atmosphere of 14.7 from the atmosphere that's in there.
Oh, hi Jimmy. Yeah, I think I caught a live one. I'll probably give you a bell and get a bit more info from you, alright mate? Thank you very much.
A vacuum that's not quite space, but it's not that far from space. In fact, it's miles away from the vacuum of space, but it's the closest that we can get in creating a vacuum that they claim is comparable to space.
Our survey said...
Oh dear Tony, another mistake. Plum Brook gets down to a vacuum of about 10 to the negative 6 torr. There is a classification of vacuums beyond 10 to the negative 9 that are called ultra high vacuums, and we've certainly got beyond that. 11, 12, I've read of 10 to the negative 14 torr. Still not quite space, but more than Plum Brook. So you got it wrong. Chalk another one up, Tony.
Look at the container that the vacuum chamber is. Look at it. Look at how fortified and how strong it is. All the concrete, all the steel. That membrane is what's required to separate the vacuum of space, which would be inside, from the pressure that we breathe outside.
Our survey said...
Okay, so I am right, Jimmy. Cheers. I'll make sure I let him know. Right, Anthony, I think we need to have a look at that building. Well, here's an aerial view of the SPF, and that photograph you showed must have been looking either from the right hand side or the left hand side into the vacuum chamber. So where are those big thick walls? Ah, there we are. Nice thick concrete walls, like in your picture, with a great big door hole on each side. So where's the doors? Oh, there they are, lit up pink. Nice big doors in their alcoves, ready to slide across. And they use inflatable seals. Cool. So, what the hell is this? This area with big thick walls? Well, that's really interesting, because that's not inside the vacuum chamber, is it? I think perhaps you need an explanation of how they use this facility. On the right, you've got a nice tall room called the assembly high bay, which is where they put the bits of kit they're going to test, the satellites and whatnot. They put them together. They're on rails, which then proceed leftwards past the first pink door into the vacuum chamber, and the rails are removed so the chamber can be sealed and you can run all your tests. Then the left pink door is open, rails are put down, and your equipment is moved into the area on the left, which is the disassembly area, or at least it was. Now it's used for other testing, like vibration testing. And they took all the kit back to pieces again. So why the thick walls? Well, when this facility was built, it was built to enable it to test nuclear-powered devices. The thick walls are there to help prevent radiological leaking from the vacuum chamber and then when you're disassembling in the disassembly area. The walls are not thick to resist atmospheric pressure. And how do I know this? Because, Anthony, my little numpty, this is the vacuum chamber that they take down to 2 times 10 to the negative 6 torr, and it's made of aluminium. So what we have overall is the concrete domed room, which does have a steel layer within it and is airtight, which is brought down from atmospheric pressure to about 1/38 of atmospheric pressure, 20 torr. Within that area you have the vacuum chamber. The area in between is an equal volume to the vacuum chamber. They run tests in there by putting heat shrouds or cooling shrouds onto the vacuum chamber. So the reason the outer concrete enclosure is made of thick concrete is nothing to do with resisting the atmosphere. It's there for other reasons. It's made of a sandwich of 3 feet of concrete, 1/4 inch of steel and 3 feet of concrete. You do realise that concrete does not provide an airtight membrane. It is permeable. The actual vacuum chamber is made of 1¼ inches of aluminium with 1/8 inch cladding internally. That is all that is needed. Let's have another look at your picture of it. Now you can see the thickness of the concrete at that doorway, and down the middle of it you can just see the edge of the steel membrane. Then you've got a gap, and then you have the metal, the aluminium vacuum chamber within. A lot thinner than those walls. But carry on, please.
Bear that material barrier in mind when you're thinking about the Earth in space.
Anthony, I think I'll bear in mind how thick that concrete is every time I think of you.
It's the exact same, but it's the opposite way around. The Earth is the pressure and the vacuum of space is the alternative, but there's no barrier. It's an open system.
Our survey said...
I think you need to do some more reading, Anthony. The Earth is a closed system, or at least it's regarded as a closed system, because the amount we lose or gain is minuscule. Anyway, back to Plum Brook. Here you can see a cross section with the actual vacuum chamber in the middle, the annulus around it, and a concrete dome. Outside, of course, we've got 1 atmosphere of pressure, 760 torr, 14.7 psi. As you've admitted, we can go out and measure. In the annulus, the area between the vacuum chamber and the concrete dome, they take the pressure down to 1/38 of an atmosphere, 20 torr. Within the chamber, they take it all the way down to 2 times 10 to the power of -6 torr, which is 0.00002 torr. Sorry about the caption. Which is 1/380 millionth of an atmosphere. That is where you've got your vacuum, within the aluminium vacuum chamber. And now, thanks to my mate Jimmy, I can show some examples of other vacuum chambers NASA has that don't seem to have great big concrete domes with great thick walls. Like the 11-foot chamber, which is suitable for human testing in spacesuits. There's also chamber B, which is 25-foot diameter, also suitable for human testing and for crewed space operations testing. And finally chamber A, which is 55 feet in diameter and 90 feet high, and it was used for the Apollo missions, both crewed and uncrewed testing. None of these chambers appear to require these humongous concrete walls that you're claiming are needed. Yeah, I know, I just don't think he's going to accept it. He just won't, he never does. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's my mate Jimmy. You know Jimmy? James, okay? Yeah, Jimmy, I better go. I better go. I think he's going to bang on again about containers. I'll catch you in a minute. Cheers. Well, go on then, Sleepy. Carry on.
I've tried asking ball earthers who push their religion onto us like it's a fanatical truth. How can we have gas pressure without a container? They seem to think it's okay to say, but we have a gradient, it disperses to nothing. Well, the gradient itself is still gas pressure. How do we have gas pressure, which includes a gradient, without a container? Gravity is the weakest of the forces, but we know that gravity is not a force. We know it's an effect that we think we perceive.
Yes, Tony. Gravity can be thought of as a force, just like centrifugal force. You're spinning on a roundabout really fast, you'll feel yourself being flung out. There is no force pushing you out, there is no force pulling you out, but you can think of it as a force. And yes, gravity is the weakest of the forces, or pseudo forces, but it still manages to hold everything down, including you and clouds and the atmosphere. Sorry, Jimmy. You want to know about Jimmy? Well, Jimmy's a clever guy. James is. He went to university, you know, Tony, and studied, I think it was electrical engineering. It was a while back. Back in the 60s, I think he left university. So what did James do after leaving university? Well, he got himself a job at NASA. I'm honoured to say that James Skipper, actually watches my videos. And that's how we managed to get hooked up. Here is one of Skipper's old ID cards, with a corner clip for security, of course. So what exactly did Jimmy do at NASA? Well, he was involved in SMEAT, S-M-E-A-T, which was the Skylab Medical Experiment Altitude Test in 1972, where 3 astronauts lived at 5 psi for 56 days in order to evaluate equipment and procedures which were planned for use in the Skylab missions. To Skip, thanks for all the work on our off-duty gear and for babysitting us. Astronauts Bob Crippen, Dr. William Thornton and Carol Bo Bobko. So is that all that Skip did? I think not. Skip was also presented with this. This flag was flown aboard Space Shuttle Columbia STS-1, April 12th to the 14th, 1981. It is presented to you in recognition of the significant contribution you made to the success of the mission. I know, Riley, you're probably just going to say, well, those are just mementos, nice little keepsakes that they gave to some of the backroom boys to keep them happy. You're wrong. It was the height of the space race, and on the 3rd of June 1965, astronaut Ed White, along with astronaut McDivitt, on Gemini 4, carried out the first American spacewalk, a 22-minute EVA. Here's Skip helping to test the Gemini EVA spacesuit. They needed to make sure that the suit could maintain an acceptable temperature when exposed to -300 Fahrenheit, and that the visor wouldn't fog up. When I said that Skip helped with this test, he's not the guy stood up. He is the guy in the spacesuit, and he was taken down to hard vacuum and -300 degrees Fahrenheit. Skip has encountered the conditions of space, -300 degrees Fahrenheit and a hard vacuum, while in a Gemini spacesuit. Riley, we know that there's a gradient in the atmosphere. 14.7 at ground level, go up a mountain, it's a lot lower, up in a plane, lower still. We know that, and I know that you're not disputing that. If you continue that gradient on, you're going to get down to 0, which is the vacuum of space. So there's no problem with that. After all, there's no container that maintains 14.7 at the base of a mountain as opposed to whatever it is at the top of the mountain. And yet we don't suddenly see all the air rush up to the peak of Everest, do we? Why? Because gravity has an effect on it. And do you think astronauts' spacesuits are made from 6-foot thick concrete? No, they're multiple layers of various materials. Now, if a spacesuit was operated at 14.7 psi, it would be rather rigid due to wanting to expand. So they're operated at about 3 to 4 psi with a lot of oxygen in the mix. You can see on Skip's spacesuit, on the Gemini spacesuit, it has no problem maintaining the atmosphere within against the vacuum of space. Anthony, you are just wrong, so wrong on so many things. If you were to replace the atmosphere with colour, with ground level being bright green, when did this box up here change to black? Throughout the whole video, it has been slowly changing in a sort of gradient, but I defy you to tell me when it was green and when it was black, when it was 14.7 psi and when it was 0. Booyah, Mr. Anthony Riley. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that, but don't go away, because straight after this we're going to have an after show live stream. We'll make sure a link goes into the live chat and to the description below the video. I'm hoping to have 2 guests. One is Mr. Casual Spaceman, who knows an awful lot about NASA, space, rockets and all that stuff. The other is no less than Mr. James Skipper. James retired from NASA about 20 years ago as a senior test engineer. He will be attempting to join us, but with family commitments and the issues of time zones, I'm not 100% sure if he'll be able to make it, and this is filmed a couple days in advance. Hopefully he will be. Anthony, study some real science. Until next time, remember to like and subscribe and stay sensible.
Shut up and sit down.